and information you haven't heard about. And we want you guys to know, don't be shy. And I want you to know that we respect everyone in our organization. We respect everyone. And we love children. And we have to tell the other side of the story. This is what you're here for, to hear the other side. It's not pleasant. Each and every one of our guests, special guests here, is going to tell you about real information you guys need to hear. And so I'm going to hand it over to Mrs. Dr. Monica Crump. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's so beautiful to see all your wonderful faces out there. I welcome you to the Black and White Tie Affair. Our theme this evening, State of the Children. It is an honor and privilege and my pleasure to be your host and MC for this evening. I'm Reverend Dr. Monica D. Crump, the television host of Help Us Near Missionary Ministry Show. My show, just to let you know, my show airs every Friday evening at 6 p.m. And if you like to go on demand or YouTube, you can just type in Help Us Near Missionary Ministry, and we have over 40 shows. I'm telling you, good shows, enlightening shows, shows that will stimulate your mind. This evening will be filled with a number of gifted guest speakers regarding State of the Children. We have also among us live music by flutist Gail Barker, violinist Michael Saxton and Michael Evans, our vocalist Marsha Evans, and our pianist Zion Israel. Immediately following at 8:30 tonight, we will retire in our Rotunda Hall, where we will be greeted by more gifted and talented men and women. Like renowned jazz artist Renee King Jackson and jazz artist Isis DeMille, we have not one, but two poets, Yvonne Jones and Dina Norris. We have DPS teacher and singer Ryan Clayton Williams, Carnell Alexander, who will enlighten our eyes on child support fraud. And not to forget Beverly Tran, the author of Parental Rights, the Acquisition of Goods, and many more. And now, before our first guest speaker, I just have a small commercial break and some food for thought. Did you know, it's the state of the children, right? Did you know 15,000, I repeat, 15,000 babies are born every hour? Now, that's busyness. Every hour, 15,000 babies are born. So this means, what does this mean? We have a responsibility. If you have a child, we have a responsibility. You know, the scripture states to train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart. So that's a responsibility. And if you don't have a child, perhaps along the way in your day or your week, you do meet a child. And what an impact we may have on that child and their life. We have our first guest speaker this evening, Ryan Liesma, the founder of Michigan Shared Custody, an organization that is working toward reducing the dysfunction of the current family court system. Michigan Shared Custody has worked throughout the state raising awareness of the issues surrounding visitation and custody, and has coordinated events, town halls, research, and legislative efforts to help children across the state of Michigan. Let's have a warm welcome and applause for Ryan Liesma.
I'm here today to talk about something that affects an incredible number of children and families and individuals throughout the state of Michigan. Also going to talk a little bit about House Bill 4691. Has anybody heard of it? It's been in the news quite a bit lately. Probably had at least 4 or 5 dozen TV spots, radio spots, articles, blogs, what have you. And it's kind of the starting point from where our efforts started taking place. So I'm going to walk through a few things. I'm going to go through an anecdote and then get into some real numbers to kind of share that data. So I'm going to have to cue my slides. Oh, there we go, right there. So, my name is Ryan, shared custody. Like the Reverend introduced, we've been holding events across the state, multiple counties, I think about a dozen counties at this point. A lot of media, our website has raised a lot of awareness. Facebook page, we've done that polling that I was mentioning, and a lot of research and working with judges, attorneys, social workers, and whole 9 yards. And I'm a father. So why are we here? Obviously we know we're here for the children, and we could probably use a clap of hands for Debbie for putting this thing together. That's passion. That's great stuff. I can't see her because of the lights, but Debbie, wherever you're at, thank you. We're here for children. We're here for their betterment. We're here for their protection, because they are the greatest legacy that we can ever provide, that we can ever give. Child custody and visitation is a very critical issue in the state of Michigan, but it's a problem across all the United States and Canada. I'll talk a little bit about what some of the legislative changes are going on, but it's a big issue that has its root back in the 70s, and as everybody knows, a lot of things have changed since the 70s, but the legislative policy hasn't really kept up with the state of American families, so that's one of the things we're going to be talking about. And again, all this is kind of couched in overall awareness for House Bill 4691. If you're going to write down anything that I talk about tonight, write that down in michigansharedcustody.org, because you can fill in all the blanks from there. So, the status quo in the state of Michigan is that one parent will be able to see their child every other weekend from Friday at 6 p.m. until Sunday at 6 p.m. and then for a few hours on a Wednesday afternoon every week. It's not much. It's like 15% of the child's total available time, which is a big problem. It's like, so I'm not an unintelligent man, but I like to use this story just as a real simple example of kind of the dynamic of the relationship between a child and their parent. And I'm sure some of you have noticed in your life that sometimes the simplest stories are able to describe very complex topics in the best way. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit just to get us going. But it's important to understand that the work that went behind that story and the studies that I'm going to talk about, there's a lot of root in psychological studies that you can research more independently, and you can find on michigansharedcustody.org some of those PhDs and doctors of psychology and such. So the story is about absence, heartache, and eventual reconciliation. Slide, please. So I don't know how many people remember this story, but the story is that there's a baby bird in a nest, and the mother left, and the egg hatched, and the bird was there, couldn't find its parent, right? And there's something in the story where it says, he looked up, he looked down, couldn't find her, right? And that's a problem. We see that in the state where traditional custody arrangements make children feel 83 times out of 100 that they're estranged from their parent, where they're looking up, they're looking down, they're looking in all parts of their lives for that parent, and they don't feel that they're there, right? Even worse, 40% of children don't live with their father ever. Ever. Right? This really exacerbates the, looking up, looking down, I can't find my parent problem. Right? 610,000 children, if you put a number to that, they don't have a paternal relationship at all whatsoever. Absence is a big problem. So the next part of the story is that the bird falls down out of the tree, right? And I don't know how many people can remember the story, but from there, the bird went looking for their parent, quote unquote. Went to a cat, went to a dog, went to a car, went to an airplane, and kept getting into more and more trouble as they went along. And the reason I draw a parallel to that is because the baby bird was looking for a way to fill that absence of a parent in unnatural ways, right? And what are some of the parallels for our children who don't have consistent presence of both of their parents in their lives? What happens when they fall down is, statistically, there's lower education performance, their grades aren't as good, right? There's increased likelihood of sexual misconduct, crime, decreased job opportunities and career development, and most heartbreakingly, increased risk of suicide. These are complications that arise from absence of a parent. So, what's the risk of these sort of things happening? And there's a super simple, easy way that you can calculate this. What's kind of interesting is if you have, in a divorced home, if you have both parents are sharing time equally, the risk of a child in that family suffering from some of the complications I was telling you about is about the same as if their parents were together. So divorce doesn't have to result in terrible complications, right? The risk on its own is actually about the same as if mom and dad were together. But if you drop one parent's time from 50% to 25%, the risk of a child experiencing some of these issues that I was talking about on the previous slide doubles. And if it goes down to 10%, it's 5 times as likely. So it's literally just math. If you take 50%, or frankly, if you take a parent's visitation, which starts at 50%, you cut it in half, twice as likely. You cut it by 2/3, it's 3 times as likely. The last part of the story is eventually, when something really bad happens, the parent comes back and places the bird back into the nest, right? So there is a happy ending to that story. Unfortunately, in our society, that reconciliation doesn't happen very often. That's something that we need to change as a society. How do we keep from having our children falling down in the first place, right? We do everything that we possibly can to be present, and we do whatever we can to not allow that separation in the first place. We're going to go from child's storybook to some of the statistics and data as to how the system is preventing parents from being as present as possible. So, what I have here in the next few slides, these are some cuts that come directly off of a number of county websites here in the state of Michigan. And the thing that I started out with, what the status quo is, it comes from this, where counties pretty much universally, it is universal across the entire state. If you go into Google, type in the name of your county, and put in reasonable parenting time, you will see this. It will say from Friday until 6, until Sunday at 6, Wednesdays for up to 4 hours, this is the assumed cookie cutter way that visitation is assigned. Next couple slides, you can just go through them. So this is another one for Jackson. I think the last one was Calhoun. Here's another one for Ingham. As you can see, everybody does the exact same thing. There really isn't any intention to alternatives, unfortunately. One more, please. Okay, so all the counties say, well, this is what we're going to do, this is reasonable. But in the family court system, there is no standard as to what parents should get. The judge has ultimate power and they can do whatever they want. And they're not held accountable for anything. And the reason that they do that is because they say each case is unique. The standard Michigan court laws in the state of Michigan aren't adhered to. For instance, there's a requirement in the state of Michigan that anytime you bring a hearing or motion request, that you have to cite some level of law. It never happens. There's never any precedent. There's never pointing back to a decision that a previous judge made. It's just a free-for-all. Because of that, there's no accountability. Judges can do whatever they want, and there is no appeals process. It's incredibly difficult to get an appeal. In fact, the rulings from the appeals court are so far few and far between. They really provide no guidance whatsoever to judges, which only encourages them to do whatever they want. Take that all together, and the judge ultimately can do whatever they want. If they don't like you, you're done. If they like you, you're good. It's just terrible. It's a terrible, terrible thing. So this is a very sobering slide here. This screenshot it shows what percentage of cases are family court cases in the state of Michigan by county where parents have shared custody. If you're way up in the UP, you're in Leelanau or Keweenaw County, you're not doing too bad, right? But if you're over here in Montcalm or Kalkaska, you have no chance. There is so much arbitrary decision-making in the courts that you can't find any sort of consistency whatsoever. The argument could be made, well, maybe they're a bad parent. I find it pretty hard to believe that parents are that much different on the northern part of the state versus the southern parts of the state. This is just an example of judges doing whatever they want when they're completely unchecked. So this is what's really interesting. In the state of Michigan, when cases were closed, there is a form that's filled out as to what the custody arrangement is, what the visitation setup is, and it is filed, but it's incredibly difficult to get a hold of that information for obvious reasons, because it does draw a line of accountability to the judges in the counties. We tried for, years and years and years to try and get this data, sent out FOIA requests. Anybody know what a FOIA request is? It's Freedom of Information Act, and these public records are accessible to the public when they ask for them. Well, guess what? These records are not. And the only reason that we have this data is because an employee of one of the family court systems in a county, when she retired, she grabbed all this data before she left and gave it to us. That's right. I agree with that. But here's what happened next. When that happened, the judges and attorneys lobbied to have all those statistics removed from required reporting. Because the data was found, they didn't want anybody to know about it, and to prevent other people from learning about it, they put in and lobbied for legislation that was approved, removing that. I find it highly unlikely that anything has substantially changed since. But this is kind of an example of how this issue is trying to be swept under the table. Motivation. I'm going to get into that here in a second. So, when this House bill started moving around the state, I have some connections in the legal world, and they have like these like bar groups. If there's 1,000 attorneys, there's 1,000 email addresses, and they sent out this giant email to everybody that was on the bar, and literally it said, we need to come out against this to protect our practice. This is a huge money machine. There's hundreds of millions of dollars that get spent by families to attorneys to family court systems with the federal government. I'll get into it in a little bit. But there is a huge motivation to keep this dysfunctional system in place because it pays people a lot of money. And unfortunately, what that ultimately comes down to is that these people are putting money in front of the kids. And it's been an uphill battle, to be honest, trying to spread awareness when you've got so many people in the system that are fighting it. I've got, go back one more. On the confirms adversarial nature, I've got something I'm going to show you, but the attorneys really want people to fight. They really do. They want to take a bad family situation and they want to pit parent against parent, and they want everybody to get riled up so that they can bill fees, right? This system encourages an adversarial relationship between the parties, and the bigger the conflict, the more people have to get involved, the more people get paid. It's a really bad thing. Going back to what I was saying before, if every case is unique, then that means that there is an appropriate right for anybody to fight and kick and scream as hard as they possibly can to get what they want. And I agree, we're all individuals, right? But in a certain sense, we're not all that different when it comes to what we're trying to do for our kids. Can we hold down a job? Can we provide for our children? Can we make sure that they go to good schools? Things like that. But the court has made it so that not a single case can take any sort of guidance or precedent from any other case. And that just makes everything worse. This is going to make some people really scream. This is to give you an idea how much money motivates this dysfunction. There's something called Social Security Part 4, and that money was set aside to assist counties in the enforcement of child support cases, and it matches child support dollar for dollar. So in Kent County, they actually bragged on their website that they administered $100 million of child support and received $100 million of federal funding on top of that. Wow. So what that ultimately means is that the more that we encourage, and here's the other problem, your child support is based on how many nights you have the children. So let's just say that your bucket of money is, $10,000, right? Mom and dad share the time together. It's $5,000 and $5,000, right? If one parent doesn't get any time, they have to write the entire check for $10,000, right? So, and there are some very bad attorneys out there, and there's some, I wouldn't say they're bad people, but, they're upset, they're angry, they're hurt, whatever. And the more nights that they can keep their child from the other parent, the more money they get paid. And then, the federal government matches all those dollars. So you take a situation like you've got two parents who are working, they see their kids the same, they each pay their half, there's no child support work, right? There isn't one for the court to enforce. The federal government doesn't pay the county any money whatsoever. But if it's turned into 75-25, then one parent has to send off, $2,500 and the county gets $2,500 just to run the paperwork. It's an unbelievably corrupt system. Do you ever have a situation where, like, you were sick, but you didn't quite know how to prescribe yourself the right medicine, or you just felt bad, but you felt like there was nothing you could do to fix it? You couldn't find a way to help yourself or cure yourself? The system kind of feels that way, in that there's kind of an implicit admission of guilt, where they understand that it is broken and that there are a lot of people that are affected negatively, most of all the children. This is an email that came from a judge, and I'm going to read through this, kind of skip around a little bit. It's the nature of the unfortunate nature of custody disputes is we wind up pitting parents against each other, in which we try to make each one of them look, one party tries to look good and make the other party look bad at the exact same time, and then they have to try and walk out of the courtroom and get along. Seems like we're not setting things up like we could. I think there's a better way to do it. I don't know what it is, but this is what we have. Got some very intelligent people that realize that this sort of setup is not good, and it hurts people, and it hurts children, but there's a lot of motivation to keep it going the way that it is. So what do the experts say? The experts say that it's a great thing to have shared parenting time, shared custody time with children. If you go to our website, you can take a look at all this data. It's hundreds of pages. But there's over 43 peer-reviewed papers that support the benefits of shared parenting. These are PhDs. These are people that are paid to do lots of research. They're very intellectual people that are putting together these papers and recommendations. 110 of the world's leading experts, considered to be the top experts in the entire world on parenting, endorse shared custody. And then lastly, the largest study ever conducted, 150,000 parents and kids, confirmed that the best childhood outcomes are when parents equally share time with their kids, young, right? But this is what the experts say. It's a smart thing to do. So what does the public think? One of the things that we did is that we did a statewide poll to kind of describe the issue, and we asked some pretty simple questions so it's not too complicated, like, do you believe that it's in the best interest of the child to spend time with their parents equally? We had 84% of the respondents in the state of Michigan said that this was something that they approved of and wanted to be in place. That's a huge number, obviously. Here's some of the poll data. I'm not going to get into all the specifics here, but just so you can kind of see how overwhelmingly people support the idea of children being able to spend time with their parents equally. It's huge. Another poll, you can find this on our website if you'd like to see it. So it's a problem, one, that we recognize. We know that we're up against some difficulties because the system doesn't want to change because it's good for them from a monetary perspective. The experts say it's a good idea. The public says it's a good idea. Enter House Bill 4691. Right? So what the bill does is that it creates a presumption of shared custody right out of the gate. So that means when mom and dad come to the court, unfortunately, right out of the gate, they both get 50-50. Has anybody here ever heard of the term preponderance of evidence? Right? The term clear and convincing evidence? Okay. Preponderance of evidence is when it's more likely than not that it's true. And clear and convincing evidence is, it really can't be denied. There's third-party evidence, like real evidence. What happens in the family court system is that the rules are preponderance of evidence, right? So if one party keeps saying the same negative things over and over and over and over and over again about the other party, that creates preponderance of evidence that it's true. And that's one of the major issues, right? When we start with a presumption of shared custody, you have to bring clear and convincing evidence that there is a reason why it should be different, with a couple of exceptions, which I'll get into here, right? So if you happen to be a parent that doesn't have equal custody, you're able to go to the court and file something called a change of circumstance, which allows the court to look at, what the arrangement is again. Change of circumstance can be as simple as my kids just got older, and it can be as complicated as, I moved to a new house, or I got a new job, or what have you. But if this legislation was put in place, it creates that presumption that we're all on equal footing, which is good. It removes arbitrary rulings. So a judge doesn't have the ability, or you wouldn't run into a situation where they had a bad day the day before and you suffered for it. In fact, this is really crazy, but the percentage of cases that are awarded shared custody are the lowest before lunch, and they're the highest after lunch. Right? That's what we have now. So the House bill kind of takes that personal component out of a lifetime decision, which is good. There's some exceptions, right? Because we want to help our children, we don't want to hurt them, right? In the event of some sort of mental illness, domestic abuse, substance abuse, that still weighs pretty heavily. If you suffer from those issues, you will not get parenting time with your children. And this was a big issue that we had to explain, that in situations where there was potentially domestic abuse, you do not have to meet clear and convincing evidence, because we don't want to take any chances in that particular case. But this just happened in the state of Michigan last week, where you had a parent who accused the other parent of domestic abuse, and it was found out to be false, and she went to jail, right? So there are obviously penalties that are in place to keep false accusations from happening, but we want to look into those pretty closely. So I've kind of given, kind of a quick overview of what's going on with the state of this bill and the dynamic and the data and figures and players. The best thing that anybody can do regarding this is to contact their representative. It's the best thing that can be done. We've had people that have volunteered to go to the House and to the Senate and to really raise awareness for this. And it's working. It's really working. A lot of congressmen, that's not the word that I'm looking for, representatives, senators, they really don't know that much about this issue. It's not something that's generally talked about. But the best thing you can do is contact your representative, educate things even worse. You can go to michigansharedcustody.org, and you can get a lot more detailed statistics and reports, and you can click on some media links. Fox 17 and News 3 and what have you, we took all their press and we put it up there. And again, contact your representative if you want to help change it. And so I appreciate y'all's time, and thank you very much.
I often counsel men and women, even just this week, that struggle with drug addiction, alcoholism, depression, and when we go back in time, they were caught in the system. And they're still struggling 40 years later, 50 years later. Our next guest speaker, attorney Connie Regulate, is from Tennessee, where she has worked in the family court system for over 20 years. She has been seen across the nation on radio and television, exposing federal funding fraud and the forced adoptions in the child welfare system. She will tell us where we must go from here. A round of applause for attorney Connie Regulate.
For being here, to know somebody so very special as Debbie, who I met through social media. We're going to talk more about it as I end today, but there's a real blessing to be able to have this platform, to be able to reach out to people across the country and across the world to address our social issues. I'm going to not really do a presentation tonight, but I have asked our AV assistant here to run just a little video I made. It's only about 5 minutes. It won't last my entire speech. But the one thing I wanted to do, the thing I'm going to talk about tonight, is about real people. Please remember that as I give you this information. These pictures that you're going to see flashing before the screen are real families, real children. Through our social media development over the past 3.5 years, we have over 8,000 people in a public group called the Family Forward Project. In addition to that, there are about 60 other groups who are people collecting across the United States and the world to talk about children who get caught up in the system. We are in a human crisis. It's not Syria, it's not Pakistan, and it's not Mexico. It is right here. It's in our neighborhoods. It's in our counties. It's in our states. It is across the United States, and it's across Europe and Great Britain. It is a universal problem. Some of the things I'm going to talk to you about are going to make you uncomfortable. I hope it does. Because only if I stir you to be uncomfortable will you be motivated for change. Today, you heard a statistic earlier that every day 15,000 children are born. Today, in America, and every single day in America, there are 500,000 children in the foster care system. Every one of those children has a parent somewhere, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a cousin. This affects millions of people in America every day. I bet you, within 6 degrees of separation from yourself as you sit here today, you know someone who's been affected by this tragedy. What I'm going to tell you about is independent of politics. And the change that we need is independent of politics. And when I finish, you will understand why. Our America, our beautiful, wonderful, progressive, greatest nation in the world, America, has a very desperate history of crimes against humanity. I don't have to tell my audience today about American slavery, but let's talk about some of the others. What about the Trail of Tears? What about sending the indigenous children of our Indian nations to boarding schools, stripping them from their families for 50 years, making them wear Western dress and cutting their hair and not using their indigenous language? What about the orphan trains? You know, for nearly 50 years, starting in about 1870, they went through the streets, the crowded cities of the East Coast, particularly New York, and they picked up orphans off the street and put them on trains and sent them to the Midwestern states. The children would be taken out of the trains and lined up on the platform, and the farmers and the people in town who needed extra help would go pick out the children that they wanted. Of course, we know about the internment of the Japanese, which is also a crime against humanity. We are not without sin in this country. We are not without sin. My story in particular is about the child welfare system. I want to take you back to 1974. The first act that passed through Congress that really incentivized child welfare was the Mondale Act, also known as CAPTA, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. This is where the federal government set up a funding system in which they started funding the states for their child welfare services. For the first time, there was an interplay between what the states had to do on their own and to what the government told them to do. But as with most government funds, there were strings attached. The federal legislation is layered and layered and layered and layered. And I would bore you to tears if I took you through every one of those steps in the last 50 years. But after the Mondale Act in 1974, the fostering connections came in 1980. And now we are beginning to say, well, the fostering... Am I back on? Yeah. That the foster parents have more rights than the parents. We actually have a foster parent Bill of Rights that comes out, that once they have a child, they have more control over it than the parents do. In 1997, this is the black hole of the child welfare system. This was the year that the Adoption and Safe Families Act was signed. What the Adoption and Safe Families Act did was now give not only the states money for child welfare, it gave them a bonus check. They got a bonus check for every child that they rehomed into the homes of strangers and forced an adoption. Now, before I go any further, I do want to say something very important, because it's important that you know where I come from. First of all, I'm an adoptive parent. I'm an adoptive parent. My 3 children were born in Russia. I love my children dearly. They're the same as if they're mine. They know no other family. We're as tight as they can get. I am not against adoption. And the second thing I want to say is I understand child abuse. I went to law school late in life. I had another career. My family was in the restaurant business. I came out of law school. I was 40 years old. I became a prosecutor. And I became a prosecutor for domestic violence and child abuse. And the very, very, very first jury trial I had was a 2-year-old who had been murdered by somebody 9 times her size. So I understand child abuse. But I also understand I have worked in the family court system for the past 25 years, and I have seen families stripped apart because their child has been tardy for school, because they have refused vaccines, because they have wanted a second opinion on a medical condition, because their children are stripped away from them when they are born in the hospital because they had a positive drug screen while they were pregnant. Now, I'm not condoning drug use, but unfortunately the opiate addiction is a big crisis in our country. And not every child who's born to a mom who had a positive opiate screen while she was pregnant deserves to be stripped from his parents. These are the rights of children as well. Children have constitutional rights to family integrity. Along with the layers of federal legislation, there became something else. Privatization of foster care. Now, most of you in here probably already realize and are aware of the fact that privatization of government services have caused some other problems in our nation. I'm old enough to remember that when privatization first began, the military complex, the industrialized military complex as it is called, the private prison system, private probation services, and now private foster care. So what that has done is that has created an industry that feeds upon itself, and the commodity for the preservation of that industry is children. Children are the commodity of private foster care, and forced adoption. Children must remain in the system. Every state is participating in this. And let me tell you about those funds, because Ryan, who bashed attorneys a lot, and so I have to apologize, I think, for my profession. But he talked about Title IV. Let me tell you a little bit more about Title IV. Title IV from the Social Security Act provides funding to the states. Title IV-D is child support, and I agree with everything he said about how the Title IV-D funds have bastardized the family court system. Absolutely agree with that. There's also Title IV-B and Title IV-E. Title IV-E is a $9 billion budget, use it or lose it, federal funding scheme that goes to the states. And it is a matching system. So if the state has a $160 million budget for their child welfare system, half of that money is federal money and half of that money is state money. And they must do what the federal government says, which is put children in foster care before they can get that money. Title IV-B money is the family preservation money. That money is 1/10 of the amount of the foster care money. Our legislators have created a perverse financial incentive for keeping children and parents tied up in a government system. Of those 500,000 children that I talked to you about, 85% of those children are in foster care because of the nebulous term called neglect. Half of that 85% is drug related. It would be a whole entire different presentation to talk to you about the devastating effects of drugs on the family. I can't do that here. But let's talk about that other 35%. Those 35% of children, not only are they under this nebulous term called neglect, which can be, and I have seen it, being late for school, refusing vaccines, parents wanting a second opinion on a serious medical condition. Those children also have relatives. There are relatives out there, there are grandparents, there are aunts and uncles, there are cousins who would step up and help with those children. Poverty. Children are taken because of poverty. And let me tell you about those children that are taken because of poverty. Let's take a family, and I've seen it happen. Let's take a family that's down on its luck and dad is out of a job, and so they're living in a hotel. They have 3 little kids, right? They're doing the best they can. Maybe they're pandering. A child welfare system is called, and they come and they pick up their 3 kids. They pick up those 3 children, they put them in foster home. Now guess what? The foster parent gets about $3,000 a month tax-free. They also get free medical care, sometimes free daycare. They get rides to the doctor's office if they need them. And those children will probably never see their parents again. Now, not only that, it gets even better. So now what the state does is they order those parents who are down on their luck and they're poverty-stricken and they don't have a job and they've given their kids away, they order those parents to pay child support to the state. Ryan thinks child support between parents is bad. Child support to the state. And guess what? If you don't pay child support to the state, that alone is enough legal grounds to lose your children forever. Child support to the state. Not only does the state take child support, but if your child happens to be disabled, and your child has any type of a disability check, then now the state now takes that disability check. Also, if the child is disabled, they get a whole new stack of federal funds under Title 19 and Title 20 because it is actually an open checkbook for a child who has a disability for the state. And their bonus money goes from $10,000 when they adopt that child out to $12,000. And here's the bonus I have left out. That family that's down in their luck and they're living in a hotel and their children have been taken from them and the foster parents are getting $3,000 a month and the parents are ordered to pay child support and they can't do it and they can't show up for anger management classes and parenting assessments and parenting classes, all that the states order them to do, and they lose their rights to those children forever. Those foster parents get to adopt those children. And guess what? They continue to get that $3,000 a month until the children are 18. Now, let's say the children are a little older. Let's talk about children who are 14, 15, 16. Now, if any of you had children that age, I'm going to tell you I've been a family law attorney for 25 years and I have clients come in and they have teenage children. I've raised teenage children. Mine finally made it to their 20s, but I tell them this. I say, you know why there's no good books on how to raise a teenager? Because anybody who survived it is going to talk about it. So let's just say you get a teenager about 14, 15 years old, and good Lord knows what they're tied up in these days, and then the internet and finding boys and all that kind of crazy stuff, and so they want to get away from their parents, and so they tell somebody their parents are abusing them. How about that? And so they come and DCS are their parents. They won't listen to their parents, and their parents take them to court, to juvenile court, because they're unruly. And before they even get to court the next day, the child has told somebody in the court system that their parents are mean to them and beats them and they don't want to go home or they're afraid to go home. They will go to foster care. Foster care. Instead of a judge saying you need to go home and you need to listen to your parents, you need to get off the internet, they go to foster care. I can tell you some personal sad stories about that, about a poor child who was living in my community, which is a very nice community, being taken out of his home because he got in conflict with his parents, and being sent a county over where he was sent to a trailer park where there were 5 other foster kids living there. And soon he was exposed to drugs and sex and violence. We are. Now, one more thing about those Title 40 funds. Those children that go in foster care, there's a shelf life. So the foster care system wants to keep that child for 15 months. 15 months in the life of a child. A 3-year-old, a 2-year-old. Their whole world. You know, I talk to clients that come in and they have little kids, and I said, it's so hard to put yourself back in the body of a 3-year-old. When your whole world is the 4 walls of your house. They take them and they put them in the homes of strangers. And they get to see their parents an hour a week. I kid you not. That child doesn't even remember who their family is. 15 months they can keep them in the foster care system, and then they have to make a decision. They have to either terminate their parental rights or give them back. Give them back. And you know what? Sometimes they do that. Like, okay, you're okay now. We're going to give them back. And who knows what they've done and messed with them. I've had a little 4-year-old boy come back from being in foster care for 12 months and talking about how the foster parents locked him in the closet. And nobody reports that. Now I'm going to talk to you. I wanted to keep my talk short and concise. I'm going to try to speed it up a little bit, but these are such important issues. Let me talk to you just about this, how this system works against itself. I was a prosecutor, district attorney. District attorney prosecutes crime. On every day that I went to work, I had to fight against the public defender's office, because you know why? The public defender's office and the DA's office, the 20 shall never meet. We were always pulling at each other. child welfare agencies. There is a saying that says that agencies that exist to serve seek to exist. Within the child welfare agency, the very same agency, there are two conflicting roles. There is a role in almost every state. The agency has the word services in it. Department of Children's Services, Family and Children's Services, 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 services. They are supposed to be providing services for a family and rehabilitating them. But you know what else they do is they prosecute parents. And so you never have the give and pull and the tug against each other to work in opposite directions. If you don't have a pull of force from both sides, you can never have balance. And let me tell you how perverse it is. They take a parent, they take their kids away from them, and they say, you've got to go to our counselor who contracts with us, and you've got to have an assessment done, and you need to follow the recommendations of that counselor. Well, now remember, they want to keep that child in foster care for 15 months. So the parent goes to their counselor, and their counselor says, well, I think you need monthly therapy or bi-weekly therapy for the next 12 months or so. Of course you do. The contractors, these private contractors for foster care and child welfare are doing the very same thing. They are on one hand being the private contractors for foster care, and on the other hand, the private contractors for these reunification services. I've sat in meetings with them and I said, y'all can't put your hand in both pockets at the same time. Why would you ever rehabilitate my client when you're making $1,000 a month on keeping that child in foster care? And they just turn their nose to me and say, you're going to have to call the commissioner. Well, the commissioner ain't going to talk to me. It is all set up to fail. It's set up so that parents will fail. I want to tell you another scary thought about this whole thing, and sometimes I close my eyes and I can visualize this because I know people who are in the business. They are in foster care for profit. They get 4, 5, 6 children, 7 children, 8 children, 9 children, 10 children, $10,000, $12,000, $13,000 a month in tax-free money. They are in foster care for profit. Now, I told you about this adoption, right? And so they adopt children, and they continue to get $1,000 a month per child after the adoption's over, and then the state shuts down. The state never follows up with them. I'm going to tell you a really scary thought I have in my head, and I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibilities. There are foster-to-profit people out there, not very good people, and once they adopt and close the case and they got their check coming in, I'm not so sure that by the time that child's 13, 14 years old, they don't sell it off to somebody else. They still get their check. The agency's out of the picture. Nobody's accounting for that child. There's no more relatives. There's no more real grandma to check on them. Recently, there was a big bust in Florida of all these children who had been picked up off the streets. I'm just telling you, it's within the realm of possibilities. Foster care has now become generational. Many of these children who've been raised in the foster care system are now having children. They have a target on their back. Because you know why? Those files never go away. And all it takes is for a foster or child welfare agency to say, well, you know, we know you were in the system. That already gives you 3 demerits on whether or not you know how to parent your children. Where are we now? As I told you at the beginning, this is not a political issue. In 2016, Senators Wright and Hatch introduced what was called the Families First Act. I went to Washington and helped lobby for it. It passed through Congress, hands down, no problem. What the Families First Act was to do was to reallocate the funding so that more funds would be used to rehabilitate and keep families together in one piece. It failed in the Senate. Now, there's a website out there called opensecrets.org. It's a great website. It's about lobbyists. You can go to opensecrets.org and you can type in any keyword you want to, and it'll tell you all the people in Washington, D.C. lobbying on that issue. Type in foster care. 114 lobbyists. 114 lobbyists. There is so much money. These industries are so huge. They're huge companies, and they go across several states. Providence, Omni, Youth Villages. They're recruiting corporations to promote foster care. Wendy's, Chick-fil-A, Mattress Firm, all about how we think it's such a bold and beautiful thing. I'm not saying that there's not a place for foster care, but I'm telling you the children have become the commodity of a very broken system. Our voices are the only thing that's going to make a change. The mantra, the story about child abuse, drug abuse, the breakdown of the family has to be on our tongues every day. We need to be reaching out to our communities. We need to engage our church in missions right here at home. Missions at home. Reaching out for families that you see need to have assistance. Reaching out to support relatives who take in children from the family so that they can have a good and stable home. I want to share, as a lawyer, I have to share a few things legal. I told you earlier that we had a crisis of crimes against humanity in the United States. Let me tell you about a few legal cases, things that always come to my mind. In 1927, the United States Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, most people probably heard that name, right? Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote an opinion that approved the involuntary sterilization of people who were in an institution. I'm going to read to you what he wrote. We have seen more than once that the public welfare may come upon the best citizens for their lives. It would be strange if we could not call upon those who already sap the strength of the state for these lesser sacrifices, in order to prevent being swamped with incompetence. It is better for all the world if, instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime or let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. The principle that sustains compulsory vaccination is broad enough to cover cutting the fallopian tubes. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. That is our United States Supreme Court Justice. 50 years later, those people know about Wade v. Roe. It's okay to kill a baby. I will say that there's a breath of hope. In 2017, not the Supreme Court, but the Ninth Circuit Court in California did rule that a social worker cannot lie in a paper they file with the court for the purpose of stealing a child. I do want to share with you also one little direct Michigan hit story. There's a case out there called the Mike's Hard Lemonade case. It's a case where a dad took his child to a baseball game and he accidentally gave him Mike's Hard Lemonade. I mean, not a very smart parenting decision. But, parents aren't perfect. They took his kid and put his kid in foster care. And the reason there was a lawsuit about it because of what they found out. And I totally believe it. And it's in other places. What the judge was doing, the judge was taking blank forms and signing her name to blank forms and leaving them in the clerk's office, and then a social worker could go into the clerk's office and write up something that the judge had never seen and authorize the stealing of a child. Now, folks, I'm telling you, I live it, I see it, it happens. We need to be outraged. Absolutely outraged. I'm going to call upon you and challenge you. First of all, this event. You need to make sure that this happens again next year, and that it's bigger and it's better, and that you raise funds and you get grants and you get a corporate sponsor, and you make this happen because this is so important. It was destroyed. Yeah, the birth certificate was destroyed. Your identity. They take your name away. They give you a new name. So I challenge you to move forward. If you're active in social media, the Family Forward group is our group. In 2018, we will finalize, took it down, but the Family Forward Foundation will get its 501c3 nonprofit status. And we look for you to join us as a member so that we can reach out and we can make a change. I want you to lose some sleep over this tonight. I want you to quiver a little bit. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to think about what I think about that child who's no longer wanted even in their adopted home and is given away. It happens. Thank you all so much for this.
I just want to say something. We are truly in a crisis. It reminds me of years and years and thousands of years ago. God's people was in a crisis. And God sent a deliverer. His name was Moses. As I look out here and I sat there, I can almost hear the Father say, there's a lot of Moses out here. You can be a Moses. Remember I stated earlier, 15,000 babies are born every hour. Not every day, every hour. That means God is still on the throne, and he's full of grace and mercy. And today, we have been caught in the net. And you can be a Moses. So the next child you see, be that Moses to that child. That's something to think about. Our next guest speaker, David Gelios, Special Agent in charge of FBI, Detroit, Michigan.
Thank you, Reverend Cronk. And I'd also like to thank the Families and Children's Justice Corporation that has sponsored this event tonight. It's a pleasure for me to be here and get a few minutes to speak to you. As Ryan mentioned, this is probably the best looking crowd I've ever spoken to. Although I have to say, when I don't wear a tuxedo very often, and when I do, I get a little pause and a little nervous because when I was new to Detroit in October of 2015, I had occasion to go to the first charity auto show preview in January of 2016, and my staff told me that one of the things we do always is, as an executive management team, we go out to dinner and then we go to the auto show. So we went out to dinner, and I was nicely in my tux, and one of my assistant special agents in charge, Maureen Reddy, was in her evening gown, and our spouses were with us, and we started to go over to Cobo Hall, and we got a page or got a telephone call, and that night we were doing a child exploitation sting in Southfield. And what we had were agents and task force officers meeting trying to identify young girls who were being trafficked. We were looking online, trying to see people advertising. We called them, we said, let's meet. They would tell us where to meet. The task force officer went up to a hotel in Southfield. Once he encountered the young girl who was 14, 15, 16 years old, they called down to the other agents and task force officers down on the ground who had seen two men bring this young girl to the hotel. And they said, okay, move in and arrest these two individuals. And when they did, the driver was taken quite easily, but the passenger put up a struggle. And during that struggle, he got hold of one of the task force officers, got hold of his gun, and at point blank range, he shot the task force officer. Fortunately, he had a vest on, and while he had quite a wound, he survived that, and there wasn't major damage. And I will say, one of my agents walked across as all this was happening, and the subject was pulling the trigger multiple times. He would have killed him and others during that encounter, but if you know anything about guns, the shell casing stovepiped in the slide, and it jammed it, so he couldn't shoot additionally. And one of my agents walked over as he was trying to kill additional people. My agent shot that individual, and he did not survive. I bring this up because I was told by my team this my topic tonight is to talk about the state of the children and as it relates to the opioid epidemic. But in that particular evening, and I'll talk a little bit about sexual exploitation of kids, I don't know if that particular evening had a nexus to opioids or to drug addiction. I would venture a guess that that young girl was already addicted to either heroin or prescription opioids, and that's how they basically enslave someone into doing something that someone otherwise would not. But I will tell you that a lot of the work we do has absolutely nothing to do with opioids. I heard this week, and my team was out helping the Detroit Police Department when a 3-year-old boy was shot and killed. That had nothing to do with opioids. Yesterday I was in Grand Rapids when we sentenced Dr. Nasser. Some of you have heard of Dr. Nasser, the Michigan State University gymnastics doctor, and he had abused and sexually exploited a large number of, many were juveniles, gymnasts, and so on. And the case the FBI worked was we determined that he had been collecting child pornography online, and we collected evidence of those crimes. So he wasn't sentenced yesterday for anything to do with the improper touching of those females. He was sentenced strictly on his possession and receipt and attempt to destroy evidence related to child pornography, and I'm happy to say he was sentenced to 60 years, and at 54 years of age, that's a life sentence. So as I said, my team told me that I'm speaking on opioid crisis today and its impact on children. And I always ask the obvious question, how long do I have? And they said, you have a few minutes. And that gave me a great deal of concern. But then I thought to the last time I was here in the Charles Wright Museum, I was here for the installation of Dr. Wendell Anthony as your president of the NAACP. And I remember when he got up to the front, when it was finally his time to give remarks, he said he was going to need a minute. And I don't know if any of you were there, but in my short time in Detroit, I've learned, I've gone to a number of Baptist functions, and when a Baptist minister says he needs a minute, so I will tell you tonight, I'm going to need a minute. Amen? All right. So I'll try and cut to the chase. But the opioid crisis, as our president has declared and everyone knows, has become an epidemic in the United States, and Michigan is no exception. Data for 2016, Michigan saw its 4th straight consecutive year of record drug overdose deaths. In 2016, there were 2,335 overdose deaths, of which approximately 1,700 were opioid related. The year prior, there had been approximately 2,000 in 2015, of which only approximately 1,275 had been opioid related. The number of overdose deaths and opioid deaths in the United States today and in the state of Michigan is alarming. I don't know if you guys know this, but we now have more deaths from opioids than we do from gun deaths. Last year, 1,164, and traffic fatalities, which was 840. This is a very, very serious problem. We have over 100 people dying from opioids overdoses in the United States per day. And we now estimate in this past year, something like 60,000 people have lost their lives to drug overdoses. So it's a very, very serious problem. We've seen significant increases in the ranks of young people, old people. Actually, the data for teenagers is not that alarming, although it's on the rise. And I will tell you, as it's on the rise in a lot of different age categories, such as the age category of 25 to 44, virtually every racial and ethnic group had serious increases from 2010 to 2015. The drive is, the incidence of deaths today due to opioids and drug overdoses is similar to what we saw in the 1980s and 1990s when crack cocaine and HIV took a very steep toll on Americans. So it's a very, very serious problem for us today. So you may ask, what does the FBI bring to the table with respect to this? Like everyone else, we have very, very finite resources, but we're trying to have an impact on this sort of thing. One thing we do is we utilize task forces. We partner with our local and state agencies, federal agencies, and we now have task forces that work. I have gang task forces. I have violent crime task forces. And one task force I'm very, very proud of is the Southeast Michigan Trafficking and Exploitation Crimes Task Force. They were founded in 2007, and we estimate now that through their operations in just over 10 years, they have now rescued over 900 juveniles in the Southeast Michigan area, the Detroit metro area. And with that, I use the term rescue sort of very, very cautiously, because we can rescue a young child, we can rescue a teenager, and then once she is out of the care of social services or whoever we may try and get that victim hooked into, they oftentimes make their way back into sexual exploitation. And the part of that that's really significant is the reason many of them are in it is they get lured into that trade through prescription painkillers. And traffickers use those prescription painkillers. They exchange pills in exchange for sexual favors, and then they slowly transition them to heroin, where they become addicted. I can tell you in Detroit alone, we have done search warrants in homes in Detroit, and one was startling to me. We got a tip that there were 2 juveniles inside a home. We went there with the Detroit Police Department. When we got there, we received word that 2 juveniles had hopped out a window and escaped before we got there, fled, but there were other women there. When we got into the place, there were syringes and needles all over the home. And as you went up the stairs, they had erected a steel door, a steel gate basically, to keep the women who were being trafficked upstairs. And so you give them drugs and you keep them trapped, and they're stuck in this terrible, terrible situation. So we're working very hard to help young people, both adults and juveniles, trying to help them. And I will tell you, when we started this in 2007, one of the things we were doing in those cases is we were arresting people, and I don't know what sort of care at that time the young juveniles were getting in 2007, but we've secured a grant in the last year or two, and we now partner with social services agencies, and we partner with Salvation Army. And when we do those sorts of things, after we interview the young victim, she's not arrested, she's turned over to people who can give her shelter, who can give her health care, and that sort of thing. So we're very, very proud of that sort of work today that's being done in the crimes against children arena that we do. But let me just say a few words, because I know it's been a long evening already, but let me say a few words about one of the things we're trying to do, and it's not necessarily focused on children, although every child today can probably go into their grandmother's or their parents' medicine cabinet and find opioids, prescription painkillers. And many of them, through introduction at school, whatever the case may be, they know they're valuable. For one thing, they're stealing those prescription drugs. And what we find is there are many, many doctors today who are actually overprescribing with no medical necessity whatsoever to people drugs. We have been called and told of doctors' offices that have a line outside them at 7 a.m. Now, I don't know about you, not many doctors, I don't think, begin work at 7 a.m. And when you have a line that's a block or two long, that should be a clue that something's wrong. And so in that regard, I will tell you, we are working that very hard. We have a prescription drug initiative, and I have one of the most successful healthcare fraud squads in the United States. And they are working today very, very diligently, doctors who are overprescribing opioids, things like Oxycontin and those sorts of things. Let me tell you the sort of work that they did in this past year. Last summer, we did a nationwide one-week takedown of related to healthcare fraud, but we had an emphasis on people overprescribing medically unnecessary opioids in the community. They wanted us to focus on those individuals. In that 1 week time, the Detroit field office, right here in this area, we led the nation. There are 56 field offices in the United States. We led the nation in every statistical category for that week except the rest. The Miami field office had approximately, I want to say, 35 arrests. We had approximately 20. But let me tell you what else we did during that day. And we were focused on doctors misprescribing opioids. We served more search warrants in that 1 week time than any other field office in the United States. We served 14, the next closest was 7. We seized $13 million in cash in that 1 week time from doctors. The next closest field office was $72,000. We had a surveillance team out watching one of the doctors we were going to serve a search warrant on, and when that doctor, we saw him go, our team go into a bank with a duffel bag, and he came out with that duffel bag. We thought this might be a good time to serve that search warrant, and when we did, he had $500,000 in cash in that duffel bag. We arrested 16 medical professionals that day. The next closest was 11, and consistent with the opioid emphasis, we had 14 opioid-related arrests that day. The next closest in the country was 8. So let me give you one example of a type of case we're working, just to tell you what doctors are doing out there. And doctors, when I say that, I'm not indicting doctors. I'm indicting crooked doctors, right? They are the exception rather than the rule, but there's plenty of them out there. Let me give you one example. North of Detroit, up in the Bay City area, we worked a case of a doctor, and we had prosecuted a doctor for healthcare fraud. So when he went to jail, his practice went over to another doctor, and that doctor took off right where he had left off. That doctor was prescribing a drug called Subsys, and I may be mispronouncing it. I'm not a doctor. And that Subsys is a fentanyl-based inhalant. It's a spray used for cancer patients who are in the most pain. In a 5-year period, he prescribed over almost 1,300 prescriptions for that single drug in 5 years. The next closest doctor in the United States had prescribed in 5 years 203 prescriptions. 1,300, 203. When we arrested him, that drug company's stocks went down 20%. So this is the sort of work that we are doing, trying to get these folks. And I would just close, because I know we have an anxious group of youth here ready to talk and ready to perform, and I don't want to slow them down. But I mentioned our Southeast Michigan Trafficking and Exploitation Crimes Task Force. I mentioned we're very, very proud of it. And 2018, unfortunately, is off to a bang. That means, I want to say we have very, very high stats because we have a very, very good team. We have a team consisting of a supervisor, 5 agents, 5 full-time task force officers, and 20 part-time task force officers. They come from the FBI, Michigan State Police, Detroit Police Department, Canton, Huron Township, Roseville, Highland Park, Southfield, Livonia, and that's just a few. They're working this with us. In 2015, just to give you a comparative, we had, this is related to children, many children and adults being trafficked sexually. We had in 2015, 261 arrests, 94 child victims recovered, 102 cases. In 2017, we had slightly fewer arrests, 247, but we recovered 191 juveniles last year. That's contributing. We had 147 federal cases, and then we've indicted over 91 traffickers out there. And I will say, year-to-date, 2018, our year begins in October, we already have 143 arrests this year, and we have 62 juveniles rescued. So the opioid crisis is certainly a significant challenge. There's a lot of challenges in our community to children, as I mentioned, that aren't opioid related. Many of you will remember, and it was a stark message to me when I was newer here, a 12 or 13-year-old child. You may remember on the news, he picked up some cash that had been dropped in a liquor store parking lot. You remember that case? That young man's crime was picking up, like I would have when I was 12 or 13 years old. If I found a few bucks on the pavement, I might have picked it up. But the man who had dropped it came over, took him captive, murdered that young man. And I would just close. One thing we need from all of you, but you by being here tonight, I know you're already motivated to help. But on that particular evening, when he was taken, there were people in the store, there were people in the parking lot. As the man took that young child away, gunshots rang out. People heard gunshots, and no one called the police, as I understand it. That subject returned afterwards, and I'm afraid to say the child was probably already dead. We found him the next day. That man returned to the liquor store. I think it was a liquor store. Someone may correct me if I'm wrong. But it was a liquor store. He went in with a gun. He was waving a gun. And I saw it on video, and I asked a Detroit police officer. I was in the command post. We had probably 30 to 50 agents that night trying to find that young man, right? And I saw this video, and I said, that strikes me as very odd behavior. If I committed a crime like that, I'd want to get out of Dodge. They said, it's not odd at all. He's going in there and saying, this is my corner. This is my area. You get me my money back, or I'm going to hurt somebody in here. Do you think anyone called the police in there? So it wasn't until I think, and he was with a cousin, and I'm not faulting a young child who's scared to death probably, but he was with a cousin, and that cousin I don't think told appropriate adults, and it was when his mom called, I think, late at night saying, my son hasn't come home. We had an incredible response to that crime. We worked all night, we tried to find that child, but the problem was, it was hours too late. So when these things happen, we ask that you have enough trust in the FBI and your law enforcement partners to give us a call as soon as possible, because our children are increasingly victimized.
Thank you so much. Building bridges. Each one of the guest speakers are building bridges, and we thank you for that. And we can do that as well. I have 4 sons, 3 teens, 13, 14, and 15, and I also have a 30-year-old. I know you're thinking, she's 30. Thank you so much. No, I'm 51 years old. I feel about 26 though. Our next guest speaker, Pat Gowans, the Director of Welfare Warriors, Milwaukee, and founder of MAGA, Mothers of Grandmothers and Grandmothers of Disappeared Children. Pat Gowans raised 3 sons as a single mom. Her theme, movement to stop CPS abuse of poor children and communities. A round of applause for Pat Downs.
Good evening. I am so excited to be in Detroit. You know that Detroit is the home of two of the heroes of the Stop CPS Abuse movement. Maybe you don't know. And these are two heroes that are so phenomenal, no one in the United States has yet matched their heroism. One is Marianne Godboldo. Marianne Godboldo, mother of a 13-year-old child, held off your Detroit police for 100 SWAT team arrived at her home and a tank to take her 13-year-old daughter and put her on Risperdal, the psych drug that she had removed her from because it harmed her. I guess Detroit must be an overreacting city, 100 SWAT team. And Marianne held them off for 13 hours. No other city has had a mother defend her child against Child Protective Services the way Detroit has. And after Marianne finally surrendered because the negotiators told her they would not take her child, they did take her child, put her on 2 drugs and in a mental hospital, and took away her artificial leg, which was part of her body. She was an amputee. So she could not run away. This is an example of the type of child abuse we're talking about, carried out by a multi-billion-dollar industry called Child Protective Services. Now, who's the other hero? I said there's a couple heroes here in Detroit. After Marianne surrendered, she was charged with a whole bunch of felonies, and an attorney from Detroit named Allison Fulmar, another African-American woman, she came forward and she said she would represent Marianne Godboldo in these criminal charges for free. Now, this is also very unusual, especially in the area of Child Protective Services. And she not only represented her and won, all charges were dropped because the judge ruled that no one in that Child Protective Service system or the police had followed any of the state laws regarding child abuse and neglect. No one had abided by due process laws. A rubber stamp of a judge was on the warrant. So everything they did was wrong. Yet, after they won and had all charges dismissed, the child was still not allowed to come home to her mom. Wow. Because Child Protective Service said, we're not a criminal court, we're not worried about criminal, we don't care what the criminal judge said. We're Child Protective Services. This explains the kind of incredible power they have. And after all the charges were dropped against Marianne Godboldo, the district attorney, a definitely non-hero, District Attorney Kim Worthy, appealed that decision over and over and over. For 4 years, she appealed and appealed and appealed, trying to say that a mother can't decide what medication her child takes. And finally, on the 4th time, she managed to get the State Supreme Court of Michigan to reinstate the charges, so they were going to have to go through a trial. And the night before the trial, Marianne Godboldo had an aneurysm, a brain aneurysm, and she's not with us here today. And you know she would be. She is here in spirit. In Milwaukee, we gave an award to these 2 heroic women, to both Marianne Godboldo and attorney Allison Fulmar. And what Marianne said is, this is a spiritual struggle. And I know she's with us here today. And by the way, there's one more hero. Marianne Godboldo's sister, Penny, came forward, took care of the child, took care of Marianne. She has done a tremendous amount of heroic work also, and she told us after her sister passed that Marianne would ask us to continue the struggle. So why do they take the kids? You know, they're not only taking the children because of moms using medication or not using medication. They're going into hospitals even nowadays. Child Protective Services has become a privatized industry. In Milwaukee, we have 169 subcontractors, not counting the major subcontractors, who all get funds through the Child Protective Service system. They create jobs for dozens and dozens of different careers. They invent new careers every decade. So there's all these guaranteed living wage suburban jobs, guaranteed, because once they take your child, first of all, you're stuck in the court system, the justice system, but you're poor. They only target poor women, poor children who cannot defend themselves in court because they have no access to lawyers, defenses. And they also like to target poor children whose mothers have some disability. So for instance, they're going into hospitals now, these privatized agencies, it's no longer just the government. And they take children because mom has a low IQ. This is not abuse and neglect. They're taking children because mom have illnesses, disabilities, mental illnesses, not abuse or neglect. They're taking children because mothers are homeless, not abuse or neglect. They're taking children because the mother has been battered by the father of the children. This is the newest one. The newest reasons for denying children stability, a home, love, and putting them in stranger danger, because children are 6 times more likely to be injured in foster care, and 60% are drugged in foster care. So how is this? It's happening because of money. It's greed and prejudice. And when you combine that, you have a slave system. This is a trafficking system of children. These little babies are taken 2 days after birth. They're put into the suburbs in white 2-parent homes for adoption. Even though they're only 2 days old, no one's ever seen the mother interact with the child. And they're already put into an adoptive home. It's called foster adopters. Our biggest agency right now is Children's Hospital. They get a $22 million grant every year to provide the so-called services in court and all the rest of the stuff to take the children and keep the children away. There's money from the federal government, $6,000 to $8,000 per child that's adopted, foster children adopted. No money for reunification. Moms, dads, grandmas try to get $1 for reunification. They can't even get a bus ticket to go to the 25 different mandatory classes and courses and therapies and courts that they have to go to. And remember, they're alone in court against a pack of lawyers. More job creation for all those lawyers. And those of us who've ever been poor in the court system know the justice system is not really for us. That justice system is definitely not for poor people. Our prisons are filled with poor people. Poor men and children are being shot on the street, and the justice system doesn't arrest them. They don't see a crime there. So that all the different things that are happening are related to money, though. You have to understand, so where does the money come from? The welfare system, which is now called TANF, the welfare system used to provide cash support to most of the people living below poverty in the United States. Now we have 11.2 million Americans living with no money, no disability, welfare, no employment, no cash at all, mostly mothers and children. More targets for child protective services, zero income. Prior to the welfare reform in 1996, we only had 500,000. Now we have 11.2 million with no money. And where is the money going? To only 23% of the TANF money that comes from the federal and state governments for impoverished people, only 23% of that goes to poor families. All the rest of the money goes into child protective services and goes into other programs for basically middle-class professional people, just like the Child Protective Services is funding all these millions of middle-class careers. So the money is scandalously being used to take children, and they give it to the adopters. The adopters are 2-parent wealthy white families. They get a check every month for 18 years after they succeed in beating down that child. And remember, they get to bond with the judges and the lawyers during the 2 years the parents are trying to reunite. But they get a check. 93% of all adopters are getting a monthly check of average $703. Imagine that. These are the people who don't need the money. They not only do they get a free child at birth, they no longer have to pay $20,000 to go to China to adopt a child. They go to get them. They get a beautiful, healthy, strong child. And they get away with it, and they get money for all this time. And the parents, the birth families, the grandmas, the great-grandmothers, it's very difficult to fight because we are fighting all these therapists, psychiatrists, judges, doctors, lawyers, all these nonprofit organizations like Children's Hospital. In Milwaukee, we are boycotting and asking everyone to boycott Children's Hospital clinics in hospital at this point until they give up their $22 million contract. Think of the conflict of interest. Children's Hospital is now also an adoption agency. They merged with an adoption agency, and they have the power to go into your home, my home, your home, and say, well, there's a healthy, beautiful child. We'll take this one, that one, and we'll put them tomorrow in that suburban home. It's a terrible crime against our children. Certainly the parents are suffering, and the mothers especially. They like to target single moms, but the babies, the children, stuck in other cultures, other lands, other worlds, stranger danger, home to home to home, they are living in a horrible danger. So what are we doing about it? First of all, just last month, the Bronx defenders filed a lawsuit. We are working aggressively to get lawsuits filed all over this country because money talks. Remember, you got it? We hit them in the pocketbook. And by suing, of course, you're going to hit them in the pocketbook plus expose the crime, the criminality of what they're doing. So in the Bronx, they brought a lawsuit on behalf of mothers with low IQs. Now, you know that's a fake test anyway. The mothers with low IQs are now being represented in a class action lawsuit in New York City as a discrimination against disabled people, the Disability Rights Act, as well as failure to provide any services for those women. So that's the first group that we're suing on behalf. I just met a woman in Houston, a lawyer in Houston named Attorney Pamela William Mohammed. She is suing also Child Protective Service, and she's not just suing Child Protective Services, she's suing, as we all are, the agencies, the state, the head of CPS, and even the guardian ad litems. In her case is about failing to place with family. They brought 2 toddlers, put them in a white suburban home. The aunt had all the resources necessary to take care and money and a lawyer. It took her forever. She only won one of the children because, after all, the suburban people had already bonded with that other little black baby. So the women in Houston, it's not just this attorney, there's the whole black social worker organization. They're fighting and demanding that they stop taking black children who have family members and stop placing black children in white homes because of the money and the demand for adoption. In Milwaukee, we're working on a lawsuit on behalf of the battered women. We now have a lawyer who is going to be representing the battered women on a class action suit, again, because no state law says that. Because a man hit you, you're a criminal, and all the children in your life have to be denied a home. And so we're going to be suing on behalf of the battered women. At this point, we don't have any city yet that's suing on behalf of the disabled women. Mentally disabled women are really targeted, perhaps at a higher rate, even than, although the battered women is new. Those TV classes are new. And it's incredible ways for people to make money off of the poor. In any case, so we're suing, we're doing billboards, we do music, we go sing to all the CEOs of all these 169 agencies. We do bus tours. On the 21st, we're going to be singing a song like, you better watch out, I'm telling you why. CPS wants your children, no lies. CPS is coming for you. They take them when they're sleeping. They take them from their beds. They don't care if you're bad or good, so get that through your head. So I want to finish here and will urge you, as others have, to get involved. I'm going to be here all night. I want to get names on a sign-up sheet of anyone who wants to be in on what's happening across the United States, and especially in Detroit, since you have these amazingly heroic women who are just, it's just phenomenal and fantastic. I have a newspaper here I want to make sure everyone gets. It's got a picture of Mary Ann Gadbogo on the front, and it's about resistance in all the wars on the poor. And you know there's a lot of wars on the poor because money is everything. And I also have a flyer that explains about Mary Ann Gadbogo too. You should be very, very proud to be from Detroit, the only city who has dared to stand up to 100 SWAT team, a tank, and Child Protective Services. Thank you.
And now, hosted by Families and Children Justice Corp, Ms. Debbie Williams.
long. I want to show a short video. And I know we're going over time. You guys be patient with us. Debbie Rock. I see some people come from all the way out of town. I want the parents and stuff who've been victimized by CPS, you don't have to say anything, but just come up on the stage right fast, please. And I've seen these people here video. These people here, no way their children should have been taken. Not at all. These their grandchildren. The court is a criminal racket. They play the game, they play the court racket. I have Judge Braxton right here, a formal judge in our audience right now. Judge Braxton, could you please stand? This judge, a formal Judge Braxton, Frank called a justice. Judge, would you come down? Will somebody help her down, please? She failed the last time. I want the judge to come down. And anybody here that represents Marion Garbolo, please come down. Anybody here that represents any friends of hers, they can come down, please. Just the judge here. You all, this stuff is really happening. It can happen to anyone in your family. It can happen to you, no matter how much money. I know that we had a guest that said that they pick with people with money, but that is true, but not true too. They will mess with you if you have money. And it's not, and I just want you guys to know that we are against child abuse and neglect. We're against that. We're not talking about kids that have been abused and neglected. We're talking about people who have not abused their children and they're taking people's kids and adopting them out. And if you fight against them, oh God help you. And I just want you to know, Judge Braxton would not be standing up here if it wasn't true. She knows it's true. The federal attorney, Ryan Clayton Williams, he knows that it's true, and all the rest of these people here know. We got these people here in the middle. They come from way up north. Could you tell me where you guys come from? The two husband and wife team here. You can come here.
My name is Jarrell Shafar. This is Sergeant Shafar. We actually came from Kansas, but we moved back to Michigan to litigate in federal courts as young lady was saying. We filed multiple lawsuits fighting back to CPS because they had taken children based on allegations, but I had all the evidence that proved everything they stated was false, and they would not put the evidence on the court record. So we're still fighting. We have appeals and we have federal court cases here and in the Federal Appeals Court of Denver. And we also did a notice of appeal for the Supreme Court, and we're not stopping until we get there.
From now on, our trouble will be out of sight. through the years, we all will be together if the fates allow. Hey, a shining star upon the highest mountain, and have yourself a merry little Christmas.
Mr. Michael Evans. Friday Valentine, sweet comic Valentine, make me smile with my heart. Your looks are laughable, so unphotographable. Yeah, you are my favorite parts of it. Is your figure less than green? Is your just a little bit weak when you open up to speak? Are you Don't change, don't change. Don't change a thing for me. Not if you care for me. Every day is a Valentine's Day. My funny Valentine, sweet comic Valentine. You make me smile with my heart. Hey, your look, you don't look so unphotographable. Yes, you are my favorite works of art.